Today we're going to talk about the Senate committee hearing where SEC Chairman Jay Clayton and CFTC Chairman Chris Giancarlo testified on cryptocurrencies and ICOs. Many news outlets and content creators reported on this event as a very positive and bullish sign, which makes me almost wonder whether or not I watched the same hearing. Before I watched the hearing, though, I read the 10-page written statements from both Chairman Clayton and Chairman Giancarlo, and there were some very consistent themes that we should be prepared for when they unravel. First of all, SEC Chairman Clayton very clearly views all ICOs as securities and believes they should be regulated as such. This isn't a new or particularly controversial standpoint, but let me continue before you rush down to the comment section. This was not only the primary focus of his written testimony, but you can also see in the hearing how frequently he touches on the issue. It was also fairly easy to tell from his tone of voice and demeanor that ICOs generally disgust him. And here's a clip to kind of illustrate that.
And I'm very unhappy that people are conducting ICOs, like public offerings of stock, when they should know that they should be following the private placement rules unless they're registering with us. Those two things make me unhappy. We're figuring out how to deal with them is why we're here. I agree with you that we should be careful not to go too far. But for me, just to be clear, for me in this ICO space, it's pretty clear that when people are violating our securities laws work pretty well. Disclosure can be improved. It can really be improved.
To him, ICOs are attempting to achieve all the benefits of both public offerings and private placements, which is outright illegal and then arguably scummy as well, even when done by quote-unquote legitimate people. Note that even CFTC Chairman Giancarlo, who appears to be a Bitcoin bull, was stern on ICOs. Many of the senators also seem to agree that ICOs are problematic. Now, up until this point, you might even be nodding your point as well because you agree with them. Most ICOs have not been done properly at best and are outright scams at worst. But here's a detail you may have missed from the testimony. SEC Chairman Clayton's written testimony detailed how cryptocurrency exchanges have money transmitter licenses but aren't regulated as securities exchanges and hence aren't subject to a number of factors like a minimum level of cybersecurity and capital reserve requirements. He also made clear that he doesn't like how many consumers trust these custodians despite the lack of regulations. He noted that the money transmitter licenses weren't designed for this type of secondary market trading, and that while AML and KYC requirements will help prevent some forms of crime as intended by FinCEN, they don't protect consumers all that well. However, the SEC really doesn't have much authority in this area for as long as cryptocurrencies aren't deemed securities. Now let's take this information and connect the dots. If the SEC deems all ICOs are securities, will there be any retroactive ruling applied? China sort of went this route and it killed many projects. The important ramification of them retroactively applying this rule would be that many existing altcoins could become labeled as securities. Now take a moment and think about what that could mean. What happens to an exchange like Bittrex, especially now that they want to introduce US dollar trading, which has many different cryptocurrencies listed? Will the SEC explicitly state which altcoins are securities, or will it provide guidelines that businesses must follow and then enforce any violations against those guidelines? Will platforms like Ethereum be targeted as they help ICOs launch in the first place? Both the written testimony and the hearing itself touched on the idea that cryptocurrency exchanges are not adequately regulated, which could suggest restrictions in the future if altcoins start becoming defined as securities. There were some other warning signs as well that many people seem to ignore. It was fairly obvious that SEC Chairman Clayton doesn't view Bitcoin in high regards. He avoided touching on Bitcoin too much, likely because it isn't a security and because he wanted to focus on ICOs, but he wasn't afraid to claim how he felt regarding its lack of usefulness and its inability to be an acceptable substitute for the dollar. Here's yet another clip that demonstrates that.
Yeah, look, there are a lot of smart people who think there's something to the value of the cryptocurrency and the international exchange, and I'm not seeing those benefits manifesting themselves in the marketplace yet. And from the perspective of, look, I look at this as perspective of protecting Main Street investors. They should understand that. The funny thing about these cryptocurrencies is they only work if they're integrated with, they only work for their purported purpose if they're integrated with the financial system. And so therefore it necessarily touches on all of our regulation. But
I would be willing to bet money that he is someone that behind closed doors thinks that Bitcoin is more a fad than anything else. It's worth noting too that this is how Bitcoin was frequently defined in the hearing, as a substitute for the US dollar. This is not how we want regulators to view Bitcoin at this stage, because it warrants a much stronger response. One of the senators very clearly illustrated his distaste for cryptocurrencies as he felt that it undermined sovereigns and fiat currencies.
And I would just say to both of you, to the extent that you have a role to play and you lack the present authorities to do so, I would love to know about that if you determine that is necessary, because I get my sense of cryptocurrencies largely driven to evade U.S. sanctions and to undermine sovereign currencies. Both of them are a challenge to the national interests of the United States.
It's also worth noting that if SEC Chairman Clayton doesn't have a positive opinion on Bitcoin, which he doesn't seem to have, that likely won't speed along the process of the first Bitcoin ETF. He reiterated the SEC's prior statements on Bitcoin ETFs in both his written and spoken testimony regarding numerous concerns surrounding the product, including liquidity, security, custodianship, arbitrage, so on and so forth. As a result, I think we can expect it to be a long time before a Bitcoin ETF hits the streets. Now, moving on to the next concern, Senator Warner had some very positive remarks on cryptocurrencies, notably that he felt blockchain and the currencies themselves weren't necessarily separable. Unfortunately, he followed up with the idea of escalating cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin to FSOC, or the Financial Stability Oversight Council. Now, FSOC is responsible for evaluating factors which could affect systemic risk, or in other words, it is attempting to prevent the next 2008 type event. Naturally, it would not be good for Bitcoin to be considered a systemic risk, especially given the fact that the chairman of FSOC is the U.S. Treasury Secretary, aka Steve Mnuchin, who recently went on record saying that he doesn't want bad people doing bad things with cryptocurrencies, which is an often cited reason for regulation and oversight. He's yet another character I wouldn't exactly characterize as being Bitcoin friendly. Another common theme throughout the meeting was that aside from CFTC Chair Giancarlo and Senator Warner, the primary reason behind wanting to regulate with a do-no-harm approach was to allow blockchain to continue to develop, not Bitcoin. And I think this is a very important distinction because we've seen historically that both politicians and regulators are concerned with the use of Bitcoin in illicit activities. This means that we could see a situation in which regulators target public blockchains, aka Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, but leave enterprise blockchains alone. This is further reinforced by the fact that the SEC Chair Clayton and CFTC Chairman Giancarlo both agreed that blockchain could be a way to improve regulatory oversight, as it would increase the transparency of data. Note that the focus is not on decentralization, but on how to better help the government have even more regulatory authority. Naturally, this always starts out with good intentions, but will end up usually being an invasion of privacy in the name of law enforcement. I think that many viewed the hearing as exceptionally bullish for really two reasons. One is because CFTC Giancarlo clearly wants Bitcoin to have a chance to flourish, and two is because the market was down and people were desperate to hear good news. However, many chose to ignore the sentiments of SEC Chairman Clayton and several of the other senators as detailed in this video. It's very easy to view news with rose-tinted glasses, especially when you are invested in whatever that news is about. It is your responsibility as an investor to remove your bias prior to hearing new information so that you can process it as accurately as possible. In the world of audio, better microphones and headphones don't aim to make you or recorded audio sound better, but rather to reproduce sound as accurately as possible, which includes even impurities. Fun fact, that's why a more expensive microphone is generally going to sound worse than a cheaper microphone in a poor audio environment. The point of this rather odd analogy is that you should always aim to process information as accurately as possible rather than as whatever best suits you and your needs. Lastly, I want to be clear and say that the meeting was certainly not bearish for Bitcoin, but there were many sentiments in the hearing that most ignored that I felt should have been discussed a little bit more. The bullish elements of the Senate hearing have been covered on many different media outlets and on here on YouTube, so that's the main reason I have chosen not to discuss them. Obviously, there were some golden moments like Giancarlo talking about hodling and respecting the sentiments of our younger generation with a thoughtful regulatory approach. I'm just not certain how thoughtful that approach will end up being, given that Giancarlo seemed to be mostly alone in that opinion for Bitcoin specifically, rather than the blockchain like everybody else. In other words, he was somebody that really seemed to say we should be thoughtful about our regulations for Bitcoin and blockchain, not just blockchain, and it seems like everybody else is really just focused on blockchain. As usual, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Make sure that you check out my Steemit if you are interested in interacting with me, as I tend to post a little bit more frequently on there and have more detailed answers just because the number of comments is a little bit more manageable. Otherwise, leave a like, comment, and subscription, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you for watching.